The morning sun painted the dusty streets of Copper Valley gold as Martha Holloway swept the wooden porch of her family's general store. Her calloused hands gripped the broom handle tight, her simple brown dress covered by a faded apron that had seen better days. She paused to push a strand of mousy brown hair from her face, squinting against the brightness as she watched the stagecoach roll into town. The bristles scratched against the old wood in a rhythm Martha could have performed in her sleep. She had swept this same porch every morning since she was 12 years old, back when her father's hands were still steady enough to do it himself. Back when Martha still believed that the future held something more for her than inventory lists and early mornings. She was 23 years old, and she had long ago accepted her place in the world. Martha was the practical daughter, the dependable one, the one who kept the store running, who balanced the ledgers each night by lamplight until her eyes ached. She knew exactly how many pounds of flour remained in the back room. She knew which customers paid on time and which ones needed gentle reminding. She carried all of it in her head, and she carried it without complaint because that was what Martha did. She carried things. She was not, however, the daughter people noticed when they walked through the door. That honor belonged to her younger sister, Rosalind. It had been that way for as long as Martha could remember. When they were children, strangers would stop their mother on the street to marvel at Rosalind's golden curls and cornflower blue eyes. They would pat Martha on the head as an afterthought. When they were teenagers, young men would find excuses to visit the store, their eyes drifting past Martha behind the counter to where Rosalind arranged ribbons by the window. And as they grew into women, the pattern only deepened. Rosalind was the one people remembered. Martha was the one who made sure they had what they came for. Martha did not resent her sister. Resentment would have required a belief that the world owed her something different, and Martha had given up on that belief a long time ago. Some women were born to be admired, and some women were born to be useful. Martha knew which kind she was. Still, there were moments, small, private moments when the ache surfaced. When she caught her reflection in the store window and saw only plainness staring back. When she lay in bed at night and wondered what it would feel like to be someone's first choice. She kept those moments folded away like letters never sent, and she went on sweeping the porch. As if summoned by thought alone, Rosalind appeared beside Martha on the porch, her golden hair catching the sunlight like spun silk. Her blue eyes sparkled with excitement as she watched the stagecoach come to a stop in front of the hotel across the street. "I heard someone important is coming to town today," Rosalind said, her voice carrying that musical quality that made men stop and stare. "A Cattleman from Montana. They say he bought the old Harrison ranch and is looking to settle down." Martha continued sweeping. "That is nice. Martha, do you not understand what this means? A wealthy cattleman, young and unmarried, coming to our little town. Mother says I should wear my blue dress to church on Sunday." Martha felt a familiar ache in her chest. She loved her sister dearly. Rosalind was kind-hearted and sweet, never intentionally cruel. But there was an innocence to her beauty that made her unaware of how her words sometimes landed on Martha's plain shoulders. "Mother says I should wear my blue dress." Of course she did. It was always about presenting Rosalind. No one had ever strategized about Martha's appearance. "I am sure you will look lovely," Martha said, and she meant it. The stagecoach door opened, and a man stepped out onto the dusty street. Even from this distance, Martha could see he was tall, with broad shoulders and dark hair visible beneath his hat. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to wide open spaces and hard work. Rosalind gasped softly. "Oh my!" Martha watched for a moment longer than she intended to. Something about the way the stranger stood there, taking everything in, reminded her of the way she herself looked at the world. Carefully, deliberately. Then she turned away and went back inside the store. There was inventory to count and orders to place. That was her world, and she had made peace with it. Or so she told herself. The stranger's name was Caleb Thornton, and within 2 days the entire town knew everything about him. He was 30 years old. He had built his fortune through honest work and smart decisions. He had come to Copper Valley seeking a quieter life. The women of the town immediately began their calculations. Mrs. Patterson assessed her daughter Eleanor's chances over tea. Mrs. Abernathy, who had 3 unmarried daughters and the strategic mind of a military general, hosted a dinner party within the week. No one calculated Martha into those equations. Not even Martha herself. Their mother spent an entire evening pressing Rosalind's blue dress. Martha sat at the kitchen table doing accounts, listening to her mother hum as the iron hissed against the fabric. "You should press something nice for yourself too, Martha," her mother said, almost as an afterthought. "I have the store to manage, Mother. I will not have time for socializing." Her mother did not argue. That was the worst part. She simply nodded and returned to humming, and Martha stared at the numbers in her ledger until they blurred. Caleb first entered Holloway's general store on a Tuesday afternoon. The light was slanting through the front windows at a low angle, filling the store with a warm amber glow. Martha was alone behind the counter, carefully writing out an order for fabric. It was her favorite time of day, the store to herself, the world reduced to the soft creak of the floorboards and the scratch of her pen. The bell above the door chimed. She looked up and found herself meeting the greenest eyes she had ever seen. "Good afternoon," Caleb said, removing his hat. His voice was deep and warm, like the sound of distant thunder on a summer evening. "I am looking for some supplies. Rope, nails, and whatever tools you might have for fence mending." Martha nodded, trying to ignore the strange flutter in her stomach. "The rope is along the back wall. Nails are in the bins by the window. Tools are hanging on the pegboard beside them." She expected him to walk away immediately. Instead, he lingered at the counter, his eyes scanning the store with obvious appreciation. "This is a well-organized establishment," he said, and there was genuine admiration in his voice. "I have been in plenty of general stores across the territories, and most of them are chaos. A man could find what he needs here without any trouble." Martha felt heat rise to her cheeks. People did not compliment the organization of a store. They complimented the prices sometimes, the selection occasionally, but the organization was invisible by design. It was the kind of thing that worked best when no one noticed it at all. The fact that this man had noticed, and had named it, unsettled her in a way she could not explain. "Thank you. I believe a store should serve its customers efficiently." "You run this place yourself?" "My father owns it, but I manage the daily operations. My mother helps when she can, and my sister assists with customers." Martha paused, then added, almost against her will, "My sister is the one people usually remember." Caleb tilted his head slightly, studying her face in a way that made Martha want to look away, but she held his gaze, refusing to show weakness. "Is that so?" he said quietly. Then he smiled, and Martha felt something shift in her chest, like a door she had long ago nailed shut was being tested by a careful hand. "I will go find those supplies now." He spent nearly an hour in the store that day. An hour. No customer in Martha's memory had ever spent an hour unless they were lost or had fallen asleep in the back corner. But Caleb moved through the aisles with genuine curiosity, and he kept returning to the counter to ask Martha questions. Not about the merchandise, but about the town, the people, the weather patterns, the best places for grazing. Martha answered each question thoroughly, surprised by his genuine interest in her opinions. She was accustomed to factual questions. How much does this cost? When will the shipment arrive? But Caleb was asking for her judgment, her perspective, as if it mattered. When he finally left, his arms full of purchases, he tipped his hat to her from the doorway. "I expect I will be back soon, Miss Holloway. You have been more helpful than you know." Martha watched him go, then shook her head firmly. She was being foolish. A man like Caleb Thornton would not look twice at her. Not once he had seen the full landscape of Copper Valley. Rosalind entered the store moments later. Was that him? The Cattleman? Her eyes were wide. What is he like? Is he kind? What did he say? "He bought rope and nails," Martha said flatly. "We did not discuss poetry." Rosalind laughed, the sound like bells. "Oh, Martha, you are always so practical." Yes, Martha thought, that is all I will ever be. Quick one, if you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 100 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Please click the subscribe button and share. Now let's continue. Over the following weeks, Caleb became a regular presence at the general store. He came every few days, always with a list of supplies, always staying longer than necessary. He arrived during the quiet hours, when Rosalind was usually out. Whether this was coincidence or design, Martha could not tell. He asked her about her favorite books. The question caught Martha off guard. No one had ever asked Martha about her favorite books. People asked Rosalind about her favorite songs and dances. People asked Martha about inventory. I love reading, she admitted, but I rarely have time. By the time I finish the accounts each evening, my eyes are too tired for pleasure. 3 days later, he returned and pressed a worn leather-bound book into her hands. A collection of poetry he had carried with him from Montana. The cover was soft with age, the spine cracked from repeated openings. This was not a book someone had bought to impress. This was a book someone had loved. Everyone deserves beauty in their life, he said simply. Martha held the book against her chest. No one had ever given her a gift that was not practical. No one had ever looked at her the way Caleb was looking at her now, as if she were something precious rather than merely useful. That night, she almost threw the book across the room. Not because the gesture had not moved her, but because it had. She was furious with herself for the warmth spreading through her chest as she turned the pages. She knew this pattern. She had watched it before. A young man named Thomas Earl had spent 3 weeks buying penny candy from Martha's counter 5 years ago, asking her questions, laughing at her dry observations, and she had let herself believe. Then one afternoon he had leaned across the counter and asked, in a voice like warm honey, whether Rosalind might be interested in attending the harvest dance. Martha had sold him the candy, given him correct change, and never mentioned it to anyone. That was the last time she had allowed herself to confuse attention with interest. Caleb Thornton was no different. He was simply a more patient version of the same story. She waited for the inevitable question about Rosalind. It never came. Instead, Caleb asked if Martha would accompany him to check on a section of his property where wildflowers grew thick in the spring. "You want my opinion on flowers?" Martha asked, certain she had misunderstood. "I want your opinion on everything," Caleb replied. "You see things clearly, Miss Holloway. You do not tell people what they want to hear. You tell them the truth. That is rare, and I value it." Martha went with him that Saturday. Riding through countryside she had seen 1,000 times but never really appreciated. Caleb pointed out hawks circling overhead, deer tracks in the soft earth, and the way the light changed as clouds moved across the sun. "You notice everything," Martha observed. "I have learned that life passes quickly if you do not pay attention," Caleb said. "I spent too many years focused only on building my fortune. I nearly missed everything that actually mattered." Martha looked at him, really looked at him, and she saw something that surprised her. Loneliness. Despite his success, despite his easy manner, Caleb Thornton was lonely. She recognized it instantly, the way one broken thing recognizes another. "What changed?" she asked softly. "I woke up one morning in my big, empty house, and I realized I had no one to share it with. All that land, all those cattle, and not a single person who would notice if I disappeared." He glanced at her. "I decided to find a place where I could build something different. A home, not just a house. A life, not just a living." Martha understood that feeling more than she could express. She had spent her entire life surrounded by people, and yet she often felt invisible. Present but not seen. Useful but not valued. "That sounds like a worthy goal," she said. Caleb smiled at her, and this time Martha let herself smile back. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the wind move through the grass, and Martha thought with a clarity that startled her that she had never felt so comfortable in silence with another person in her entire life. They reached the meadow, and Martha understood immediately why Caleb had wanted to see it. The wildflowers stretched in every direction, a quilt of color that seemed almost impossible. Lupins and Indian paintbrush, wild daisies and goldenrod, all tangled together in a display so vivid it looked like something from a dream. Caleb asked her judgment. Martha stepped down from the wagon and walked into the flowers, feeling their soft petals brush against her skirt. She knelt and examined the soil, crumbling a handful between her fingers the way her father had taught her years ago. She studied the slope, the way water would run in the spring rains, the density of the root systems. Preservation, she said. The roots of these wildflowers are holding this slope together. If you put cattle here, this whole hillside will wash out in the spring rains. Graze your cattle on the eastern pasture. Leave this as it is. Caleb laughed. Not at her. With her. That is exactly the kind of answer I was looking for. No one else would have thought about the erosion. They would have just said it was pretty. It is pretty, Martha admitted. But pretty does not survive the spring rains without good roots. His expression softened. No, it does not. 3 weeks later, a storm rolled in fast from the west. The kind of storm that turned Copper Valley's main street into a river of mud and sent everyone scrambling for shelter. Martha was alone in the store, arranging the new shipment of dry goods, when the sky split open and rain hammered against the windows like fistfuls of gravel. The bell chimed, and Caleb came in soaked to the bone, water streaming from the brim of his hat and pooling on the floorboards. "Mr. Thornton, you are dripping on my floor," Martha said, though she could not keep the amusement from her voice. "I apologize. Yours was the nearest door. I am sure the feed store would have been equidistant," she said, reaching for a towel. Their fingers brushed in the exchange. Martha felt it travel through her hand like a current. She pulled back quickly. The rain showed no sign of stopping. Caleb settled on the bench near the pot-bellied stove, and they talked. Not about surface pleasantries or the price of grain. They talked about loneliness, about the difference between being alone and being lonely, how you could be surrounded by people who loved you and still feel as though you were standing on the other side of a window, watching life happen to everyone else. Caleb told her about the winters in Montana, how the silence of the snow could fill a house until it felt like a living thing, how he had talked to his horses just to hear a voice. "People think that being overlooked is the worst thing," Martha said, staring at the rain on the window. "But it is not. The worst thing is being seen and then immediately dismissed. When someone looks at you and decides in an instant that you are not worth their attention. That is worse than being invisible because it means they saw you and chose to look away." She regretted her words instantly. She had said too much. She braced herself for the awkward silence. But Caleb said very quietly, "I see you, Martha." She looked at him, and his green eyes were serious and full of something she was afraid to name. "I see you," he said again, "and I have never once looked away." Martha did not answer. She picked up a bolt of calico that did not need organizing and began to refold it. Her hands needed something to do. Caleb watched her for a moment. Then he said, "I told Mrs. Abernathy at that dinner party that I had no interest in being introduced to every pretty face in town, that I had already found the most." He stopped. He closed his mouth and opened it again. "I said the most interesting woman in Copper Valley." She asked who. I told her the Holloway girl. And she said, "Oh, Rosalind." And I said, "No, the other one, the other one." Martha's hands went still on the calico. She stared at the fabric and felt the words land exactly where they always landed. Caleb's face changed. She watched the realization hit him, watched the color drain from his expression as he heard his own words played back. "Martha, that is not. I did not mean. It is fine, Mr. Thornton." Her voice was even and professional, the voice she used for difficult customers. "It is what everyone calls me. The other one, the plain one, the one who is not Rosalind. You are hardly the first." "No." Caleb stood from the bench, and there was something almost desperate in the way he moved toward the counter. "That is not what I was telling you how wrong she was, how blind these people are. I said it carelessly just now because I was trying to." He ran his hand through his still damp hair, visibly struggling. "I am not good at this, Martha. I am good with cattle and fences and account books. I am not good at saying what I mean to the one person I most need to understand me. It was the most inarticulate she had ever heard him, and strangely, it was more convincing than anything polished could have been. A man performing a role would not stumble like this. A man with a script would not look this stricken. "I should not have told that story," he said quietly. "I told it badly. What I meant was that even then, even in my first week here, I knew. And I have known every day since." The rain continued to fall. Martha looked at this man standing in her store with wet hair and clumsy words and an expression that held no performance at all. Only the raw, uncomfortable look of someone who has accidentally hurt the person they were trying hardest not to. She did not forgive him exactly. It was not the kind of thing that required forgiveness. But something shifted, because for the first time Caleb had not been perfect. He had been human. And Martha, who had spent her life around people who said careless things without noticing, recognized the difference between someone who did not care and someone who cared so much that their caring made them clumsy. The town began to talk, as small towns always do. People noticed that Caleb Thornton spent more time at Holloway's general store than any purchase required. They noticed he sought out Martha's company at church socials, walking with her rather than dancing with the eligible young women who hoped to catch his eye. They noticed and they whispered, "I do not understand it," Martha overheard Mrs. Patterson say to Mrs. Cooper outside the store one afternoon. The window was open, and their voices carried clearly. "That man could have his pick of any woman in this town. Why does he spend all his time with the plain sister when Rosalind is right there?" "Perhaps he is shy," Mrs. Cooper offered. "He is not shy. He is confused. Someone ought to introduce him to Rosalind properly. Once he sees what is available, he will come to his senses." Martha's hands stilled over the bolt of fabric she was measuring. The words should not have hurt. She had thought them herself 100 times. She had rehearsed this exact scenario in her mind, the moment the world corrected Caleb's apparent error in judgment. But hearing it spoken aloud, so casually cruel, as if her unworthiness were a simple fact no different from the weather, made her heart twist painfully. She finished measuring the fabric. She cut it straight and true. She folded it neatly and placed it on the shelf. And then she went into the back room and pressed her palms flat against the wall and breathed until the burning behind her eyes subsided. She did not tell Caleb about the whispers. She did not want to see pity in his eyes, or worse, realization. But something happened the following Sunday that Martha did not expect. After church, Mrs. Abernathy approached Caleb on the lawn, her 3 daughters arranged behind her. Martha watched the woman gesture toward her daughters, and then toward Rosalind. She was presenting the options. Caleb listened politely. Then he said something that made Mrs. Abernathy's face go rigid. He tipped his hat, turned, and walked directly across the lawn to Martha. "Miss Holloway," he said, and his smile carried something almost defiant. "I was wondering if you might walk with me. I saw a red-tailed hawk nesting near the creek this morning, and I thought you would appreciate it more than anyone else in this town." Martha looked past him to where Mrs. Abernathy still stood with her mouth open. The entire churchyard was watching. "I would like that," she said. They walked together toward the creek, leaving the whispers behind them. And for the first time in her life, Martha had the dizzying, terrifying feeling that she was being chosen. Not by default. Chosen deliberately, publicly, in front of a town full of people who believed she was the wrong choice. It was the most frightening thing that had ever happened to her. Days turned into weeks, and Caleb kept coming. He brought Martha books and small gifts. A tin of her favorite tea ordered from Denver. A hand-carved wooden bookmark shaped like a hawk. Wildflowers from the meadow, tied with string. He told her about his dreams for the ranch and asked about her dreams for herself. When she admitted she had never really allowed herself to dream, he looked at her with such tenderness that she had to look away. "Everyone should have dreams, Martha," he said. It was the first time he used her given name, and she felt it like a touch. Even those who believe dreams are not meant for them. That night, alone in her room above the store, Martha sat on the edge of her bed with the poetry book open in her lap. She had read it cover to cover 3 times now, each time finding new meaning in lines she thought she already understood. But tonight she was not reading. She was thinking about how easy it would be to let herself believe that Caleb cared for her, that his visits were not kindness, that his stumbling, imperfect words in the rain had meant exactly what they sounded like they meant. She stood up. She put the book on the shelf. She went downstairs and reorganized the entire storeroom by lamplight, moving 50-pound sacks of grain and rearranging shelves until her arms ached and her mind was too tired to think about green eyes or clumsy confessions. This was what Martha did when feelings became unbearable. She worked. She made herself so useful, so exhausted, so buried in competence that there was no room left for wanting. Because wanting was the most dangerous thing of all. She had learned this early. As a child, she had wanted to be noticed. As a teenager, she had wanted to be valued. Each time, the wanting had been met with silence, and each silence had taught her the same lesson. Need less. Expect less. Build your life around what you can control, and never, ever depend on another person to see you. Because people do not see what they are not looking for, and no one was looking for Martha. Now Caleb Thornton was standing at the walls she had built and asking her to open the gate. And Martha's answer was to rearrange the storeroom at midnight, because the alternative was to sit with the terrifying possibility that he meant every word, that she could have this, that she deserved it. And if that turned out to be false, if she let herself believe and was wrong, the fall would destroy her in ways that mere loneliness never had. She closed up the storeroom at 2 in the morning, her back aching, her hands raw, and made a decision. She would enjoy Caleb's friendship for what it was. Nothing more. It was the sensible decision, the practical decision, the Martha decision. It lasted exactly 4 days. On the 4th day, Martha was stocking shelves when she heard Rosalind's bright voice greeting Caleb at the counter. They made small talk, the easy, graceful kind that came naturally to people like Rosalind. Martha stood in the back room and listened, and felt something inside her crack. They sounded right together, his deep voice and her melodic one, like instruments in a duet. This was what people expected. The handsome cattleman and the beautiful girl. Martha walked into the store with her back straight and her expression neutral. "Good morning, Mr. Thornton. What can I help you with?" Caleb turned to her, and his entire face changed. The polite friendliness he had been showing Rosalind shifted into something warmer, more focused, more alive. "I came to ask if you would accompany me to the ranch tomorrow. A section of fence came down in last week's wind, and I could use a second opinion." Martha glanced at Rosalind, expecting disappointment. Instead, her sister wore a small, knowing smile Martha had never seen before. "You should go, Martha," Rosalind said gently. "I can manage the store." Martha hesitated at the door, and Rosalind called after her. "Martha!" Her sister's voice was different now, quieter, stripped of its usual brightness. "Do you know why I always let you handle the accounts and the orders and the inventory? Why I never learned?" Martha turned. "Because you did not need to. You had other gifts." Rosalind shook her head. "Because every time I tried, you had already done it. Better than I ever could. I was 11 years old when I realized that you were the one holding this family together, and I was just the one people looked at." She paused. "I have always known which one of us mattered more, Martha. I am not sure you ever have." Martha did not know what to say. She opened her mouth, closed it, and left the store before her sister could see her expression. She was not sure what her expression was doing, but it felt dangerous. They worked side by side for hours, Caleb driving posts while Martha held the wire taut and wrapped it around the anchors with a deftness that earned his open admiration. They worked well together. That was the thing Martha could not deny, no matter how hard she tried. They anticipated each other's movements. They fell into a rhythm that felt practiced, as if they had been doing this all their lives. And when they stopped for lunch beneath a cottonwood tree, sharing bread and cheese from the basket Martha had packed, the silence between them was not empty. It was full of things unsaid, hovering in the air like the cottonwood seeds that drifted around them in the warm breeze. "Martha, there is something I need to tell you," Caleb said. "Here it comes," she thought. "He is going to tell me about Rosalind, or that he is leaving. When I first came to this town, I had given up on finding someone who understood me. I thought I would build my life and make peace with being alone. And then I walked into your store, and you told me where the rope was without smiling, without trying to charm me, without pretending to be anything other than exactly what you are. And I thought, there she is, the person I have been looking for without knowing I was looking. The cottonwood seeds drifted between them like snow in summer. Martha felt tears building behind her eyes and willed them back. She had not cried in years. She would not start now. Not here, with the wide sky above them and the valley below and this impossible man saying impossible things. Martha's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her knees to still them. You do not have to say these things. I know what I am, Caleb. You do not need to be kind. I am not being kind. Kindness is what I show to strangers. What I feel for you is something else entirely. I am not ready, she said, and the words tore out of her. I want to be, but I have spent my whole life being the one who is not chosen, and I do not know how to trust this. Caleb reached over and took her hand, gently, as if handling something infinitely fragile. Then I will wait, as long as you need. I am not going anywhere, Martha. They sat together under the cottonwood tree until the shadows grew long, and Martha did not pull her hand away. Spring arrived in Copper Valley with an explosion of wildflowers and birdsong. The hills turned green overnight, the creek swelled with snowmelt, and the town prepared for its annual spring dance. For the first time in her life, Martha found herself wondering what it would be like to attend on the arm of someone who had chosen her. But that was foolish. Caleb had spoken honestly under the cottonwood tree, but he had not spoken of courtship. He had not declared intentions in the formal way such things were done. He was her friend, perhaps the truest friend she had ever known. But surely that was all. She was wrong. The evening before the dance, Caleb arrived at the store just before closing time. Rosalind was arranging ribbons near the window. Their mother was in the back room. Martha was behind the counter, counting receipts. Caleb walked past Rosalind with a polite nod, crossed the store in 4 long strides, and stopped in front of Martha. His expression was serious, almost nervous, and Martha had never seen Caleb Thornton nervous. He was a man who had built a fortune from nothing, who had stared down Montana blizzards. But standing before Martha Holloway at a wooden counter in a general store, his hands were trembling. Martha, I need to speak with you about something important. Her mouth went dry. Of course. He reached across the counter and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused, and Martha felt electricity travel up her arm. I came to Copper Valley looking for a fresh start. I thought I knew what I wanted, but I did not expect. He steadied himself. I did not expect you. Caleb, I do not understand what you are saying. I know. I am. He let out a breath that was almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. I have rehearsed this. I have said these words to my horse, to my reflection in the water trough, to the empty chair across my dinner table. And now that you are standing in front of me, I cannot remember a single one of them. Martha stared at him. Something about his confession, the image of this strong, capable man practicing a speech to a horse, cracked something open inside her chest. Then do not recite, she said, and her voice was barely a whisper. Just tell me. He tightened his grip on her hand. His green eyes never left her face. Not once. Not for an instant. You captivated me, he said, from the moment I walked through that door. Not the way you think. Not with what the world calls beauty. With truth. You told me where the rope was, Martha. 3 sentences. No smile. No performance. And I thought. His voice roughened. I thought, there she is. The person who will never lie to me. The person I have been looking for without knowing I was looking. I thought, if this woman ever loves me, I will know it is real, because she does not know how to make it anything else. Tears pricked at her eyes. There are others who would make you a better match. My sister. I have no interest in your sister. His voice was firm but gentle. She is a lovely young woman, but she is not you. She does not challenge me. She does not make me want to be better. She does not occupy my thoughts from morning until night. A sob caught in Martha's throat. "You do not know what you are saying. I am plain. I am practical. I am not the kind of woman men write poems about." Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Martha's breath caught. "I have written you poems," he said softly. "In my head, every night before I sleep. I have composed letters I was too afraid to send. And every poem, every letter, every imagined conversation ends the same way." He opened the box. Inside, resting on dark velvet, was a simple gold ring with a small but perfect diamond that caught the fading light and scattered it like tiny stars. "Martha Holloway, you are the most extraordinary woman I have ever known. You are kind without expecting thanks. You are intelligent without seeking praise. You carry the weight of your family's business without complaint. And you are beautiful in ways that most people are too blind to see." Martha was crying now, tears streaming down her cheeks. Years of careful composure dissolving like a dam giving way. "I am asking you to marry me," Caleb said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am asking you to share my life, my home, and my future. I am asking you to let me spend every day proving to you that you deserve to be loved. Not because you are useful, not because you are dependable, but because you are you and you are everything." The store was silent except for Martha's quiet sobs and the evening wind. Rosalind stood frozen by the window, her hand pressed to her heart, her eyes wide with joy for her sister. Martha looked at the ring, at Caleb's hopeful, terrified face. She thought of every morning she had swept that porch believing this moment would never come. Every whisper she had overheard. Every time she had looked in the mirror and accepted plainness as her whole story. And she thought, no. That was not my whole story. That was only the beginning. "Yes," she whispered, then stronger. "Yes, I will marry you." Caleb's face transformed with joy. He came around the counter and gathered her in his arms, holding her close as she cried against his shoulder. She could feel his heart beating rapidly, matching her own, and she realized he had been just as afraid of rejection as she had been afraid to hope. "I was so certain you would choose her," Martha murmured into his chest. Caleb pulled back, cupping her face in his hands, wiping her tears with his thumbs. "There was never any choice to make. It was always you, Martha, from the very first moment." Rosalind rushed over and embraced her sister, crying happy tears. "I am so pleased for you. You deserve this. You have always deserved this." And Martha understood that Rosalind had never wanted to eclipse her. She had simply been living her own life, unaware of the shadow Martha believed she cast. The shadow had been Martha's own creation, and now, finally, she could step out of it. The wedding took place 2 months later, in the small white church at the center of Copper Valley, on a Saturday in late May when the sky was so blue it looked freshly painted. Martha wore a dress she had sewn herself. Weeks of late nights by lamplight, stitching with a care she had never devoted to anything for herself. Simple but elegant, white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. She had looked in the mirror that morning and thought, "I look beautiful. Not beautiful like Rosalind, beautiful like Martha." And that was enough. Wildflowers from the meadow on Caleb's ranch filled the church, the same flowers Martha had knelt among months ago to test the soil. The flowers Caleb had preserved because she told him to. The entire town came. The people who had whispered about the Plain Sister sat in their Sunday best. Mrs. Patterson was there, and Mrs. Abernathy with her 3 daughters. Rosalind stood as maid of honor, radiant, smiling so wide her cheeks must have ached. Their mother sat in the front pew weeping. There had been a conversation between them, quiet and long overdue, in which her mother had held Martha's face and said, "I am sorry I did not see it sooner. I am sorry I did not see you." And Martha had forgiven her, because that was what Martha did. She carried things and then she set them down. Martha walked down the aisle slowly, wanting to remember every step. The creak of the floorboards beneath her feet. The scent of wildflowers and candle wax. The faces turning to watch her pass, seeing her, truly seeing her, some of them for the first time. And at the end of the aisle, Caleb, standing tall in his dark suit with tears already streaming down his face, making no effort to hide them, because Caleb Thornton had never been ashamed of what he felt. She reached him and he took her hand, and the warmth of his grip steadied her the way it always had. "You are everything," he whispered. "You have always been everything." "I thought you would choose her," she whispered back. "I chose you, and I will choose you every day for the rest of my life." The minister began the ceremony, his voice carrying through the small church, but Martha barely heard the words. She was too busy memorizing this moment. The feel of Caleb's hand in hers, the way the light came through the windows and fell across them both, the knowledge, settling into her bones like warmth after a long winter, that she was loved, not tolerated, not relied upon, not appreciated for her usefulness, loved, fiercely and completely and without condition. All those years of believing she was meant for a small life, practical life, a life without romance or passion or the wild, reckless joy of being chosen. All those years had been wrong. She had not been destined for invisibility. She had simply been waiting for the right person to recognize what she had always carried within her. They exchanged vows, their voices steady and strong, making promises before God and the town that neither intended to break. They exchanged rings, the simple gold band sliding onto Martha's finger like it had been waiting there all along, like a key finally finding its lock. And when the minister declared them husband and wife and Caleb kissed her, the church erupted into applause that shook the window panes, and Martha laughed against his lips with a joy so fierce it felt like flying. They walked out of the church into bright afternoon sunlight, husband and wife, blinking against the brilliance of a day that seemed determined to celebrate them. The townspeople spilled out behind them, throwing handfuls of rice and wildflower petals that caught in Martha's hair. There was a reception on the church lawn, with fiddle music and dancing and tables laden with food that the women of the town had been preparing for a week. Martha danced with her husband, her head against his chest, her feet moving in time with his, and she marveled at how natural it felt. She had always stood along the wall at socials, watching others, believing that rhythm and grace and joy were gifts meant for other women. But in Caleb's arms, she moved without thinking, without calculating, without holding anything back. Later, as the sun began to set and the fiddles slowed to something sweet and tender, Martha found herself standing apart from the celebration for a moment. Old habits were slow to die, but this time standing apart did not feel like exclusion. It felt like gratitude. She was watching her life and thinking, "This is mine, this happiness, this man, this future, all of it is mine." Caleb appeared beside her. "What are you thinking?" "I am thinking that I spent 23 years believing I was invisible, and I am wondering how many other people are standing on the edges of their own lives right now, believing the same thing." "You were never invisible, Martha. You were just surrounded by people who were not paying attention. The ranch was waiting for them. The house on the hill with its wide porch and its rooms that Caleb had been quietly furnishing for months, making choices he now confessed had been guided by Martha all along. The bookshelves he had built because she loved reading. The kitchen garden he had planted because she had mentioned once, offhandedly, that she missed growing herbs. The rocking chair on the porch, positioned to face east, because Martha had told him that watching the sunrise was the only luxury she allowed herself. He had been listening, all those months, to every word, every preference, every small truth she had let slip without realizing she was revealing herself. He had been building her a home before he ever asked her to share it. When Martha walked through the door for the first time as his wife, she pressed her hand to her mouth and cried. Not from sadness, not from relief, from the overwhelming, almost unbearable realization that someone had loved her long before she believed she could be loved. That while she had been busy convincing herself she was invisible, Caleb had been paying the most careful attention of his life. "You built all of this for me," she said. "I built all of this for us. But every decision I made by asking one question. What would make Martha happy?" She took his face in her hands, her calloused, practical, capable hands, and she kissed him. "Thank you for choosing me. The choice was the easiest one I ever made." Years later, Martha would sit on that east-facing porch and watch the sunrise over the ranch they built together. The cattle grazing in the eastern pasture. The horses running along the fence line. The wildflower meadow on the hillside, still blooming every spring, still holding the slope together with its deep, invisible roots. And beside the house, a garden growing herbs and vegetables and flowers, tended by hands that were still calloused, still practical, still capable, but now also loved. She would think about the girl who swept the porch of the general store every morning, the girl who believed she was meant for a small life, and she would feel a tenderness toward that girl so profound it brought tears to her eyes even decades later. She would wish she could reach back through the years and tell her, "You are not invisible. You are not plain. You are extraordinary. And someone is coming who will know it the moment he walks through your door." But she knew that girl would not have believed her. Some truths cannot be told. They can only be lived. Martha would set down her cup of tea and watch the sun climb higher over the land she had helped build, over the meadow whose roots she had saved, and she would feel Caleb's hand settle on her shoulder the way it did every morning. A quiet touch, a choosing, and she would reach up and cover his hand with her own, her calloused fingers lacing through his, and she would think, "There you are. There you have always been."